Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Charlotte here, and today I'm sharing 5 floral cards using the stamp set that came in the May 2019 card kit from Simon Says Stamp, which is the Delicate Flowers stamp set. For the first card, I'm going to be using some of the pattern papers that also came in the kit, which are the ModaScrap Let Your Soul Bloom papers. These are single-sided pattern papers. And I first stamped several of the flowers and leaves onto pink and green paper. I'm then using my Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers to add some shading to the images. This really helps with paper pieced images to make them pop and look more interesting. You can skip adding it, but it helps to give them a bit of dimension and life. I also did fussy cut all the images out, and I left a border when I fussy cut because the stems of the leaves are just a single line, so you can't really cut up to the line. I'm then going to assemble the pieces on my card base. I did play around trying to work out how I wanted the arrangement. Actually, in hindsight, I might have swapped those top 2 buds around, but it works well enough. I have the largest flower adhered down popped up on foam tape, and then I'm going to add all the other elements with liquid glue and just slide them in underneath that focal flower. And reverse tweezers really help to get everything into place when doing this. I'm keeping my cluster focused towards that bottom right hand corner and then going out towards the left with the leaves and up with the buds and flowers. Off screen, I white heat embossed one of the sentiments from the stamp set onto a snippet of black card, and I'm just going to tuck that in behind the large focal flower, and that will complete my first card. That one's quite simple. I think the fussy cutting probably took the longest on that card. For my second card, I'm going to be doing some watercolouring with the stamps, and I'm keeping this one fairly clean and simple as well. I first stamped my sentiment and then just very roughly masked it off before adding the smaller bud above and below the sentiment. I'm going to use Gansai Tambi pearl colours for painting my flowers. And I'm not a great watercolourist, I just wanted to give it a go, so I'm doing it my way. This might not be the right way, but this is how I'm doing it. I started by adding the pearl pink to the flowers, very roughly filling them in, and then I gave them a good spritz with water to make them run, because I want a messy, loose watercolour background. And I sopped up any extra water with a piece of kitchen towel, and I will go in and add a bit more pink to the flowers and let that bleed out through the water that's there. I also added some green so that the green is also bleeding out into the background, and I just kept adding water and paint until I was happy with how it looked. So I set it aside to dry. I then came back in to paint the flowers. Again, I'm no expert and I just tried a few different ways. I actually think I changed the technique a bit as I went along. This took me quite a long time to do and my camera did die, so I didn't catch all of it. But I worked a petal at a time, making sure I wasn't working in ones next to each other so they wouldn't blend into each other. And I did dry them between layers. I put the colour down to the base of the petal and then used clean water to draw it towards the top to try and help add some dimension to the colour. And I used the green in the same way, letting the colour draw out and try and build the depth of colour. I did work in lots of layers until I was happy with how it looked, and I also decided to use the same pink paint to fill in the open areas of the letters on the sentiment as well. Once I was happy with the panel and I had let it all fully dry, I decided to round the corners with my corner chomper just to give it a bit of a softer look. I also rounded the corners of my card base. I believe this is cotton candy card base. And then I adhered the panel into place with double-sided tape. The entire back of the panel is covered with double-sided tape, which helps it to adhere down flat if there's any warping. And that completes the second card. Again, that took me quite a long time with all the painting, but I really like the end result. My third card quite possibly took me, actually definitely took me the longest of all 5 of these cards. I'd been planning to do quick cards and I don't know what happened. I just had ideas and had to run with them. So I'm again using a pink card base and I'm stamping onto it with coral berry ink from Altenew, and I've created a mask of each flower and I'm going to fill in the whole background. You might want to make more than one mask if you're doing this, but I just made do with just one and used a spare post-it note to cover any other areas that might need it. Once I'd fully stamped the background, I started colouring in the card base. I started with just a white coloured pencil to colour, but then I decided to add more depth of colour using a pink pencil as well. I thought this just helped give it a bit more dimension. This took me several hours to colour the whole card. I think the end result was worth it, but it did take a very long time. Obviously, I'm not going to show all of it, just the one flower. Once I had finished it, I created a frame using some pink iridescent glitter peel-offs from Love from Lizi, and I'm going to use my craft knife to remove the extra pieces. I've put the frame so it's about 1/4 of an inch in on each side. I stamped one of the sentiments from the stamp set onto the lower right hand corner of my card using ruby red ink, which is a step darker than the coral berry I'd used in the background. And to help the love word of the sentiment stand out from that busy background, I filled it in with the same pink pencil I'd used for my shading. And that completes card number 3. So for card number 4, I decided I would actually try and make something a bit quicker, like I'd originally been planning. And I'm going to create a heat embossed background. So I have some Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. I arranged various of the stamps from the stamp set onto the panel. I stamped them down with embossing ink and I'm coating with Simon Says Stamp Steel Navy embossing powder. And then I will heat set that. I think this looks like kind of the pattern you might get on some teacups, the kind of blue and white floral pattern, if you know what I'm talking about. I'm sure there's a name for that design, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. If you know that, do leave me a comment down below to remind me what it is. So I heat set that panel and then I'm going to cut it apart, which is always a bit daunting. When you are happy with a panel, it's a bit scary to go in and cut it up, but I went ahead. I cut it in half and then took 1/8 of an inch out of that middle to leave a gap, and then I eventually ended up with 5 pieces, each with that 1/8 of an inch gap in between them. So I'm going to arrange them onto my blue card base and making sure that I have them correctly aligned and correctly spaced to leave that gap in between them. I heat emboss one of the small sentiments from the stamp set with that same Steel Navy embossing powder onto another snippet of Nina Solar White card and die cut it with a banner die from Cat Scrappiness Crafters Essential 1 and adhered that onto the lower left panel, which completed card number 4. Moving on to my final card, I'm again going for a very clean and simple design. I'm using the largest flower from the stamp set and one of the sentiments, and I've stamped them directly onto my white card base. And then I'm going to be colouring the flower in with my Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers. I usually work from darkest to lightest when I colour, but I did decide in this case to go in with my lightest colour to map in the shadow areas, and then I'm going to go through working one petal at a time. And I'm using a variety of pinks to colour in my petals with a red as my darkest shade to really give some nice contrast there. Again, this took me quite a while to do the colouring, so I'm not going to show the whole thing. I'll just show a couple of petals, and then once I am done with colouring those, I will move on to showing you how I coloured the leaves. There are 2 styles of leaves in this image. There's the kind of flatter ones and then the segmented ones. I used yellow greens for the flatter ones, and I actually used a blue for my shadow on those because that added a bit more depth of colour. Then for the segmented leaves, I'm using a more turquoise blue for my shadows and citrus greens for the actual green. I did later decide that I needed a bit more depth of colour on those flat leaves, so I went in with a darker true blue and blended it back out to complete those leaves. Then as a finishing touch for this card, I decided to add some Nouveau drops, and I've chosen bottle green Nouveau drops. And I'm creating a visual triangle to add these onto my card. and working in odd numbers as well. Both of those are good ways to ensure that your Nouveau drops look good. And that completes my 5th and final card. These stamps from this stamp set are so fun to work with. I would have loved to make more cards with them, but I just ran out of time. I am hoping to create more cards with this kit if I can find the time, but it depends if the next kit arrives anytime soon. I might end up working on that instead. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below if you enjoyed these cards and which one you liked best. All the products I have used are linked down below if you'd like to buy any of them. Some of the links are affiliate links, so if you shop with them, thank you very much for your support. If you're not yet a subscriber to my channel, you can subscribe by pressing the button on screen now. And if you'd like to see more from me straight away, there are a couple of videos showing on screen and you can click on them to watch those. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!